Hello and welcome back to JLXP, our second episode here from Korea. As many of you noticed, last week there are two projects going on right now for me. We have Let's Go over on the LCS YouTube channel, and we have JLXP, which is being dropped on the JLXP YouTube channel. Throughout the entire World Championship, we'll be bringing you episodes weekly of JLXP and Let's Go, regardless of what happens to North America. I will say, we are doing our best to bring the most interesting storylines from the North American perspective. So this week, C9 and Energy are still alive. We're going to be able to talk to Zven later in this episode. And week 2 of Swiss is looking to be very exciting. So let's get into it. Okay. Some of the top moments from week 1 of the Swiss stage for me was, weirdly enough, literally the first game between Team Liquid and T1. And I know it didn't end the way we wanted it to end, but the first 25 minutes of that game definitely started the way that Team Liquid would have wanted it. Piosik at the time actually felt like he was back to Worlds form when they made the run back in 2022. I'd say APA with his Syndra pick into Faker's Orianna felt like he was holding his own. Summit defended a 2v1 turret dive, was able to turn around to kill. They were actually looking really strong. However, I'd say after that, they kind of fell flat. They played against Energy, who, even though they were excited to play at the time, even though Energy had beaten them in back-to-back best-of-5s just in the LCS playoffs, you could tell the internal confidence of Team Liquid was really high when they reacted to the draw. But that game went really poorly. Palafox solo killed APA, Orianna versus Syndra at level 2. And in my opinion, that moment definitely flipped a switch somewhere with Team Liquid where I think they lost confidence in their mid laner. And when that type of thing happens, it will ripple through the entire team. So it's not necessarily to make an excuse for Team Liquid losing basically all their games. They'd end their game score at 1-4, losing to GAM. Calendar yesterday, by the time you watch this, is going to be about 2 or 3 days ago. It is just a disappointing year for Team Liquid. I won't spend too much time on them, but I do want to give some final thoughts on Team Liquid's year as a whole. I do think it is a team with a lot of talent that spent basically the entire year trying to overcome their inherent team fighting flaws, and they just weren't able to do it. It is so difficult for me to decide whether it is the rookies not having good team fight positioning or the veterans not being good at team fighting, if that makes sense. Because I always felt like Summit and Piosik were never setting up in the correct positions for a front line to allow the carries to succeed. But at the same time, when the carries are the first ones getting hit in fights, you don't know if it's the chicken or the egg in a lot of situations. And I think despite a lot of their ability to get early game leads in North America, they just never pulled it together in team fights, and ultimately, I think, tilted a little bit before that GAM series. But also, not to take anything away from GAM, they played great. They have been actually very close to beating North America in many different situations across their international history. The first experience people had with GAM was back when they called themselves the Gigabyte Marines. I think it was a play-in best-of-5 against TSM where they went up 2-0 to actually, at the time, it would have eliminated TSM from, I believe, the MSI play-ins. And TSM reverse swept them, but they've been very close for quite a while. Levi was on that team as well. So for him, I imagine this was quite an amazing moment of a half-decade-long journey to actually take down a North American team in a series at Worlds for the best time. But I do want to talk a bit about some of the overall trends we saw in Champion Select, because Worlds metas evolve from stage to stage. And even though we are still in the Swiss stage, because there are 2 days off, and for some teams, there will be 3 or 4 days, or even 5 days without playing games, it gives them an opportunity to step back, react to the things that they've seen on stage. They've been able to step outside of their scrim bubble a little bit, and they may actually make some significant changes to their champion power analysis, basically. So here's some stats from the first 5 days of Swiss, 30 overall games. Orianna is the only champion that has 100% presence. It's 11 picks and 19 bans. It's 7-4. But really, Xayah has been the most impactful champion throughout the Swiss stage. 93% presence. So 2 games, Xayah somehow made it through the pick and ban phase. But in the 16 picks, it's 14-2. I look back as well across this entire year with Games of Legends, and Xayah's been picked about 3,000 times across all the games that website tracks. And in those 3,000 games, it actually had a 55% win rate, which is really high for that many games in a competitive environment, which makes me think that Xayah has been a little bit sleeper OP almost the entire year in terms of the way it fits into the meta. And yeah, I was thinking last night about how AD carry metas have developed over the past several years. So 2021 would have been the last time we were almost stuck in this Xayah Kai'Sa Trist meta. All the way back even to 2019 when Perks was the AD carry for G2. He was the AD carries that he was really good at were Xayah and Kai'Sa. They're these really versatile AD carries when engage is strong. Because Kai'Sa is almost a combo champion in hard engage comps because it allows you to one-shot the first person that gets CC'd as soon as Kai'Sa gets a little bit fed. And then Xayah, I'd say, would be slightly stronger in lane, is extremely good against dive champions because of the ultimate and the feathers, but then is also better when behind. So of the Xayah Kai'Sa, I will usually take Xayah. And then the other meta that we have would be the Aphelios Jinx or Aphelios Jinx Zeri meta, which to me exist when you can keep those people alive. So enchanters need to be a little bit stronger, or dive champions need to be a little bit weaker, which I think because we spent so long in the last year or so in the Zeri, Sivir, Yuumi, Lulu meta that people got completely frustrated with. Enchanters have been nerfed pretty substantially. Engaged champions have been buffed fairly substantially. So Xayah is just in this really strong spot. And the adaptation that I expect to change would actually be more Xayah bans, which will bring in a question of what makes it through. So in order, the most banned champions so far in the 30 games was Kalista, number 1, Maokai, Orianna, Rumble, Poppy, Nico, and then Xayah. So I think Xayah bans will go up. Weirdly enough, I think Kalista bans are going to drop. I think they're mostly just going to swap out different AD carry bans. And the reason Kalista is a number 1 ban is it is also good against shorter range team compositions. And you can take over a lot of games if you have a strong early game laning phase on the Kalista. And I think in the best of 3 phase that we're now in, there'll be no more best of 1s at the World Championship, only best of 3s and best of 5s. I think teams will be more willing to dare someone to actually beat them with Kalista, and you don't need to dare them to beat you with Xayah anymore because it's happened 14 of 16 times. Really quickly as well, the reason, like just some of the other champions that Xayah would be good against, I'm going to talk about the most played in each role. So most played top lane is Cassante at 13 games, Jax at 10, Renekton at 10. Jungle is J4 at 11, Vi at 9, Maokai 7, Lee 7, Sett 7. Mid, Orianna and Azir, not necessarily great things for Xayah, but I feel like because of the top jungle pool, Xayah can still fit in there. And then bot lane, Kai'Sa 19, Xayah 16. And here's the drop after Kai'Sa, Xayah, who are 19 and 16 games. We have Kalista, Ezreal, Trista, Aphelios, and Zeri at 3 games each. So Xayah Kai'Sa is 5 times more picked than any other individual AD carry in the Swiss stage so far. Supports Rakan, Alistar, Rel at 18, 13, and 8 before it drops to Nautilus and Renata at 4 each. So that's a snapshot of the meta so far. One final Xayah revolving meta note. I did a bit of a deep dive. I tried to look at Games of Legends has this cool feature where you can basically sort all indirect champion matchups and what the win rates are. And the champions that I found with the largest, like with an actual real sample size that Xayah doesn't have a good win rate against are Zoe, Ziggs, Gangplank, and Rumble. So of the top lane pool, Rumble gets banned a lot, but it's the champion that can actually reach Xayah and doesn't necessarily have to dive to take Xayah out of a fight. And if anyone actually has the guts to pull out GP and doesn't get completely steamrolled with turret dives, is actually very effective against Xayah in team fights. But enough on meta. First week of Swiss. Obviously, Team Liquid eliminated, BDS eliminated, and a really good draw. I think. I say that now because we haven't had the two NA versus EU matchups yet. Here are some of my thoughts on Swiss overall, though. I really like the format because, and bear with me, it's very unfair, but doesn't feel very unfair. So, one issue, especially from an NA fan's perspective, and I'd imagine EU fans would share a similar sentiment, is wanting to care about your teams deep into the World Championship. I think that's part of a thriving international ecosystem where people can have hope for their own teams. And I think as the number of Korean and Chinese teams at the World Championship has crept up and isn't really going to be going away anytime soon because DRX, the number 4 seed from Korea, won the World Championship last year. So it would be pretty unthinkable for Riot to no longer allow Korean 4 seeds to go to Worlds. You have 8 slots for the knockout stage, and you have 8 Korean and Chinese teams. And I feel like if you did an incredibly fair seeding, you'd probably have all of the top seeds be Korea, China. You'd have to go pretty far down before you're going to seed your first EU team based on the recent results. I mean, the last 2 times that Europe has made it out of group stage at the World Championship, they've immediately been 3-0'd in the first round of the bracket stage. That was Rogue last year and Mad in 2021. So it is fairly grim, but then you have a situation like we have now in the Swiss stage where Energy is going to be playing G2 and the winner just gets to go. And not only does the winner get to go, they get to go without a bottom 2 bracket seed. So they're not going, the winner of that series is not going to play JDG or Genji in the first round of the bracket stage. So there is a small chance that they would also be able to do well in that series. But then in terms of that possibility existing, that means guaranteed one of the Korean or Chinese teams is not making it out of Swiss. However, the fact that they're going to lose to 3 unique opponents, no matter who those 3 unique opponents are, gives you the believability that they did have their chance. Because if they're going to lose to 3 different opponents, they probably weren't going to win Worlds anyway. Because ultimately, even though as an NA fan, a lot of times you're fighting over scraps, the ultimate goal of the World Championships is to win, especially for the Korean and Chinese teams. So I've just been a really big fan of the format so far. Another thing that I think I'm looking forward to in the second week of Swiss is if I compare the way the second week of group stage would often go, where group A, B, C, and D would all have their own days and teams would play all within their group on that day to decide the final seeding. Most of the time, from a 6-game day, 1 or 2 of those games would matter. And there were many instances where the first 2 games of the day would be played, and you'd already know who was going to the bracket stage. And then you basically had 4 exhibition games. There will be no dead games ever in Swiss. Every game, every series will be either a series to promote a team to the bracket stage or eliminate a team from a world championship. So that intensity that you feel in the first phase of group stage or Swiss stage is actually going to carry over this time into the second week, which to me is really exciting. But now it's time to talk about EU versus NA, because when Energy and G2, well, okay, first off, the draw itself is it basically feels almost like gambling. The payoff that you can get when your fate is seemingly decided by an emotionless ref on stage is pretty amazing. And even the fan interaction when when T1 was drawn and Energy was still in the pool and the Korean fans started an Energy chant to hope to draw them. Probably not great for Energy, but I think an amazing, fan moment that multiple regions are kind of buying into the excitement of Swiss. But from the EU reactions that I've seen, Cadrill's co-stream, some EU fans that I know, I won't name anyone specifically, at the time, very happy that they drew Energy. I think part of that is G2 last year at MSI beating EG 6 times in a row. But then at the World Championship, they did go 1-1 and they went 1-5 in that group. They were in the JDG Dplus group. I think at the time they're called Damwon. So it wasn't a good World Championship for them. G2 didn't necessarily have a good MSI showing because they lost to BOG in that, I believe it was a loser bracket. But a lot of the EU fans are thinking, easy, we'll take down NA. I do want to go through some of the NA versus EU history because I'd forgotten how close or not close it had been through MSI and Worlds. Overall, across all Worlds of the last 13 years, the Worlds record would be 35-42, a 45% win rate, which I think based on the emotion of it all, feels pretty high. It feels a lot higher than the reactions that I've seen would suggest. If you add Worlds to MSI, it definitely goes down for North America. It's 41-57. The NA team who has the most EU games, C9, 22 games, 10-12 record. The best NA team versus EU teams with over 5 games played total is CLG. They're 7-2. Energy is not inheriting CLG stats, but they may have inherited their spirit. Just throwing that out there. The worst NA team versus EU with more than 5 games played is EG at 4-8. Weirdly enough, the EU team with the most NA games played is Fnatic, and they're 25-8. So Fnatic has actually been the champions of Europe. That's a better record than G2 has in that. And I have found the G2 versus NA stats. Overall, their MSI total is 11-4, but their Worlds total is 4-4. Last year, 1-1. 2020, when they were in the group with TL, 1-1. 2019 Worlds, 2-0. That was when they were in the group with C9 and they were just coming off their MSI victory. And then you can go to like the ancient history where CLG 2-0'd them in the 2016 Worlds group. That was Perks' rookie year. And Zven, who we'll have on later, was actually in that group. So I might get his thoughts on that. So anyway, before I talk specifically about the analysis of the matchup, let's talk a little bit the emotion of the matchup. And I've had this discussion already, even though the draw happened less than 24 hours ago, with a lot of different NA fans. And I've gotten a lot of different feelings about whether it is good that Energy drew G2 or if it's a disaster. And I think it really just depends on how much loss aversion you have. Because as you could hear by those stats, 41% all-time win rate for NA versus EU. And even recently, right? Even recently, in 2022, 5-9 overall between MSI and Worlds. 2021, NA was actually 4-3 against EU across the whole year. 2020, 2-3. Like, that's 3 complete calendar years since the disaster that was 2019 when NA was 1-8. But 3 complete calendar years where if you just looked at Worlds games, NA would actually have a winning record against EU. If you looked at Worlds and MSI, obviously the 0-6 is going to push it to a losing record. But it's not like this, oh my God, every time NA plays AU, they get completely slammed. Yet that is the feeling, for sure. So, the fear of if you don't want Energy to play G2, your logic would be, well, Energy probably isn't beating anyone anyway, so we may as well not lose to EU so EU can't gloat about it. And then also, if you don't trust G2's ability to beat Eastern teams, because their game against Weibo was incredibly close. They had a 99.4% win probability of losing that game before their comeback. And then their Baron throw against Dplus would also be, you could consider it questionable. And again, these are all hypotheticals. This isn't my actual analysis at the moment. You would think, hey, if they don't get out for free against Energy, maybe they won't even make it to bracket stage. And that would be great, right? But here's my counter. If you don't think G2's that good or good enough to beat a higher tier Eastern team, why would you not want Energy to actually have a chance to beat them? Because if Energy doesn't play them, the opinion that G2 is better than NA will not go away. Even if C9 beats Fnatic, if NA can't take off like the head of the beast, G2, people are going to think they're better anyway. So the bright-siding version of this would think it's only upside for Energy because G2 and EU fans think they're better anyway, regardless of if this game happens or not. Yes, it can be confirmed, and honestly, I am favoring G2 in this matchup. But this is a good thing for Energy. I think it is their best chance of making it to bracket stage, but more importantly, since I think the goal of the World Championship is a little bit lofty, the goal of knocking G2 down and moving to bracket stage over them, it's an opportunity to really shift the narrative. And you do not get this opportunity if Energy, let's say, Drew LNG loses to them, draws C9 because C9 beats Fnatic and beats them to make it in, and then gets 3-0'd in bracket stage. But if they can take down G2 here, I think it actually has a real opportunity to shift the narrative for NA versus EU. And that's literally their goal. When I talked to Contracts last week, he said he really just wants the region that he plays in to be a region that he can feel proud of. And I think a lot of North American fans, even though it is so scary to believe in a series against G2 again after 2019 MSI Finals when G2 had, at the time, the fastest international best of 5, 3-0, I think it's worth another fight. I really do think it's worth trying to take them down in that best of 3. But let's talk about the actual matchup between Energy and G2 and some of the things that Energy has actually had to do to get here. So Energy has definitely had the easier opponents. Their first opponent was Weibo, who they lost to, which knocked them down to the 0-1 game. They then were able to draw an interregional matchup. They beat Team Liquid. And then they drew a cross-regional matchup, but it's against the EU team that EU has abandoned, which I'll get to in a little bit, how I actually kind of hate the way people are reacting to Mad Lions. But they beat them in a very close game to move in 2-1. So the wins are against TL and Mad, and that moves them to 2-1. And the loss against Weibo. G2 played Dplus first, number 4 Korean seed. Beat them in a... I think G2 actually played considerably better aside from the Baron throw. But I also think Dplus had a bad meta read, which I'll get to. Then they beat Weibo in the greatest single game comeback of the World Championship so far to move to 2-0. And then that moved them into a potential promotion matchup against Gen G, in which they just got destroyed. But I also think Gen G and JDG are the 2 favorites going into the tournament, so not a huge surprise. So therefore, this is actually the first Western team that G2 is playing against here. They beat 2 4 seeds, they lost to the 1 seed, and now they're playing against Energy. So depending on how the common opponent here is Weibo, and G2 definitely looked better because they beat them. However, that Weibo game is so perplexing to me from G2's perspective because it was fairly even. And then G2 throws at Baron. Then they give up the Mountain Soul. And then God knows how do they actually make that comeback. Xiao Hu's on his ear. I forget exactly what the Shy is playing, but I know win probability isn't a perfect statistic, but as a viewer, I really did feel that game was completely over. Mountain Soul, Baron buff, and about a 7 to 8,000 gold lead. However, G2's composition was the god composition in terms of your ability to turn a game around. How many Worlds highlights have we seen with Orianna Rakan? And that's what G2 had. They had Caps on Orianna, they had Mickey on Rakan, and then the cherry on top was they actually had Rel jungle as well. And let me tell you, in terms of mid laner pairings with Rel, whether it's support Rel or jungle Rel, Orianna is the best because the range of the Rel alt magnet effect is pretty much the same as the Orianna alt. And the overall damage that you can pump out in that AoE can turn almost any game. I remember back on TL in 2020, we even had I think it was a finals weekends game against TSM or something where we came back from an 8,000 gold lead pretty much because we had Orianna Rel. So it's insane. The one small good thing in North America's favor is that energy is actually going to be blue side. And for those of you who are wondering how that's decided, the pools that were used for the original Swiss draw 5 days ago had energy and G2 both in pool 1. So the way side selection is decided for the later rounds is if a higher pool team is playing a lower pool team, the higher pool team will have side selection for game 1. If teams from the same pool are drawn against each other, then the first team drawn will get side selection. So that means because Energy was the first team drawn and both Energy and G2 were pool 1, Energy gets side select in game 1. That's also going to be true for C9 and Fnatic because C9 was the first team drawn. They're both 2 seeds from EU and NA. They're both pool 2. So C9 will get side selection. Slight advantage. Blue side, that's also another reason the blue side has such an insane win rate at the World Championship. I think normally it would be like 55 or 60%, but because it's oftentimes also the better team that is on blue, just with how the other draws have gone, the blue side win rate is like crazy inflated. I think it's up around 70% so far at this World Championship. Draft-wise, I think a lot of G2 fans are going to be concerned about what happened in the Gen G series, where Gen G was red side, and there are 3 bans for Han Sama, and G2 in general was Kalista, Orianna, Draven, 2 games in a row. But I also think at the time, G2 had a lower priority on Xayah. They weren't first picking it. So Gen G not only was getting rid of Han Sama's lane dominant champions, and I think the strongest mid laner in the game right now, Orianna, G2 was not rewarding themselves with the Xayah pick. So I think if Energy ends up going over to red side after winning a game, because that's what G2 will need to be able to have side selection and pick blue side, I think that those 3 bans actually won't be easy things to replicate. And Energy is going to have to make some choices because I don't think you want to give Xayah over for free unless they're cooking some stuff. So I look at some of the, I'm trying to read in between the lines of the Worlds meta here with what some teams were doing in scrims. And I'll take Dplus as an example. Their first 2 games that they lost, they were trying to play outrange. So first game against G2, they played, I believe it was Varus Jace, mid-bot. It was poke Varus. And those things can actually get a pretty large lead against a Kai'Sa or a Xayah because of the range advantage. Unfortunately for them, G2 got Ocean Soul in that game, and the poke was a disaster. And then the next game that D+ Cade played was against KT, and they gave over Xayah again, and they tried to play Ziggsbot. So twice they actually tried to outrange against Xayah, and twice it failed on stage, but you would only try that on stage if it was working somewhere. So I imagine they were finding some success with that in scrims, and it does logically make sense. That's why Ezreal is also a pick into Xayah, because the outrange can be very effective. Caitlyn would be another pick that can actually outrange in lane and maybe put Xayah down. So D+ is like the poster child for they didn't think Xayah was good because they were playing Varus against it, they were playing Ziggs against it, and they have a high prio on Caitlyn. So if Energy or G2 for that matter want to try and cook some counters to Xayah, that I think is where you would see them. Gangplank in the top lane, as mentioned earlier, would be one of those. But I guess my overall thoughts on this matchup would be cautious optimism for Energy, not because I think they're favored, but because I think the upside of them winning is so high based on the perception of North America across the last 5 years, going back to the 2018 World Semifinal, where Fnatic beat C9 3-0 to go to the World Final in Korea. That was a massive moment in the power shift between North America and Europe. You follow that up with the 2019 MSI final after Team Liquid had beat IG. That literally didn't matter in the minds of NA and EU fans because it was immediately followed by G2 3-0ing them. So because those two sweeps happened, until you actually counter that with a sweep of your own or a big win of your own, I don't think you were ever changing that perception. So even though I absolutely think Energy are decent-sized underdogs, if they can pull off a 2-0 or even a 2-1, I think it could be a really big moment for NA. And I actually think EU fans should be a little nervous because right now, even I'm agreeing with you. LEC is better. G2 is better. And that is at risk. And I hope that Energy can take that energy. That was unintentional. Final thing on Energy is throughout the entire LCS summer split, they were actually better against teams that were better than them and worse against bad teams. So advantage Energy, I guess. They were 6-2 against the top 4 and 3-7 against the bottom 5. I feel like G2 will be a top 4 team. So that gives Energy a decent chance. Okay, that was a lot on G2 Energy, but I think that's because it is the most interesting thing. I'm going to run through a little bit faster on the rest of the matchups. So C9 versus Fnatic is actually going to be the first matchup we see in the second week of the Swiss stage. So to get here, C9 beat MAD. They lost to LNG and they lost to T1. And Fnatic lost to LNG. They beat GAM and they lost to BLG. So it's actually really hard to get a read on how good Fnatic is. Because I think if you just think back to like, oh yeah, all they did is beat GAM. Well, yeah, and they also lost to some really good teams. LNG, even though they are the 3rd seed in the LPL, finished 2nd in the LPL summer split. And then BLG, even though they lost to LNG in the LPL playoffs, was 15-1 in the summer regular season and basically only lost to JDG for the last 6 months, and then won best of 5 to LNG, which ended up knocking them down to 3rd place in the summer. So just really, really hard to figure out how good Fnatic is, and I think that actually makes them dangerous because your confidence from a C9 perspective is going to be high after watching them get beasted by LNG and BLG. I think Humanoid is always a threat. I think Razork is strong. I think if C9 is looking to get an advantage, they've actually been able to generate gold leads through Fudge as much as people want to, dunk on Fudge after the T1 game where he got pushed in permanently by Zeus's Rumble and everyone on C9 did poorly. But in the MAD game and the first LNG game, actually, Fudge had a pretty substantial gold lead and C9 was able to break top turret fairly early. So I think that might be something that they can just continue to run against Fnatic and try and punish Oscarinin a little bit early. But then C9 goes as Berserker and Zven go, because he's such a beast in team fights. And Fnatic, at least, has shown a decent amount of inconsistency in their bot lane. I mean, pretty easy to say that Fnatic has been inconsistent when they were like the 9th place team at the start of the year, when they didn't even have their full roster for the season finals. Wonder was the top laner who actually qualified them for Worlds. And now Oscarinin is back in after his hand injury. So a really hard to predict matchup, I feel like. I put this one very close to 50-50. Some quick analysis on C9 for what I feel like they've delivered so far in the Swiss stage. Their first game against MAD, I was quite encouraged by it at the time. They ran Cassante mid for MNS. They ran Talia jungle for Blabber. And they just had these massive windows to make plays. There were so many times where Chasey from Mad Lions was on Gwen in the top lane, and they do these 3-man dives. And it felt like they had 10 seconds to make them work before anyone was able to cover. And they just had tempo advantages pretty much the entire game. They also had Berserker on Xayah in that game, which is a good sign for their meta read right at the start of the tournament. And even though he didn't do anything exceptional in lane, he was just there for team fights and pretty much never in danger. So that game felt pretty good. The LNG game, they didn't really have much of an early game advantage, which is hard to do because LNG is a very slow team with quite strong laners. So, and Scout is the LPL MVP. The big advantage that C9 had in that game was when there was a pause. Right after that, they found an initiation on a Scout. Literally the only time Scout had died at the World Championship up until that point. Got Baron, and you felt like they were going to be able to win. But then their team fighting down the stretch was just too weak. There was a dive at mid-tier 2 turret that they fumbled. Their chance at going 2-0 was thwarted. But ultimately, like in the back of their heads, that doesn't matter. Because if you project forward, they would have then had to play JDG. I don't think they'd win in that series. And they would have been knocked down a peg anyways. So T1, that's the next game. That was by far the worst game they played. It is easy to blame draft there, and I don't think Belveth is it. I don't think Blabber will play it again. But Belveth in conjunction with the lanes was the real struggle there, because both M&S and Fudge, whether it was a tactical decision to manage their waves and greed a little bit for some extra gold, or if they were just straight up getting outlaned by Zeus and Faker, the lanes were not able to hold in the positions they needed to hold to protect the Belveth in the jungle, and owners Jarvan could just invade Blabber over and over again. And then after that happens, when you're playing Belveth, the game is going to fall apart. So I think the first 8 minutes of the game is all you really need to look at. C9 got demolished in that T1 first 8 minutes, but I also don't think they're going to play that style of composition again. So TLDR, I want C9 to play more like they did in the Mad game in terms of making proactive plays on the map and sacrificing their own lane income, which I don't feel like they were willing to do in the T1 series. I think that gives them the best chance to win. All right, next matchup on that day is going to be Weibo versus Mad. I do want to make a quick point on Mad and how I have seen what the EU community is doing and has been doing to Mad, because that's what happened to NA teams in the past. Maybe even TSM when they were 0-6. The first sign of doing something that the fans don't like is almost a self-fulfilling prophecy, because you don't realize how chronically online all of these players are and how bad it feels when your own region is essentially disowning you and flaming you, and, you know, the Baus is saying he's not co-streaming because he'd have to watch cringe games like Mad Lions. When literally, guys, Mad Lions was better than North America at 2021 MSI. They made it to the bracket stage. They were the only European team to advance at the 2021 World Championship. They are consistently, across years, a top European team. If you just isolated to the last 3 years, Elyoya would probably be the best jungler in the entire region. Yet, no support, in my opinion. And I get it. They lose to North America. That sucks. They don't want to lose to North America. But I just think it's unfair to the accomplishments that Mad has had and that team has done, that the fans are treating them that way. They also play against Weibo, who I think is hugely underrated. I think Xiaohu is absolutely cracked. It's his 7th World Championship. He is a 3-time MSI champion. And I think he may have a field day against Niski. I don't think Niski is going to be able to move that much in that game. So I heavily favor Weibo, and I think that may be Mad's final series of the World Championship. Dplus, I think, gets a bit of a break from their hard draws earlier. They get to play against GAM. GAM is definitely not someone you can walk over, as Team Liquid proved by losing to them 2-1. But DK is the most interesting team to me from a meta perspective because they're the team that tried to outrange Xayah twice. They also are the team that has Def's Caitlyn. I'd say Canyon still hasn't looked amazing. The team still hasn't necessarily looked like they can pull it together, but the chance that they can make some level of miracle run is high. I don't think it's that much of a miracle. They beat GAM, they're 2-2, and then it's all about the draw in that 2-2 match to try and make it through the next round. Another matchup that Korea and China probably aren't thrilled with is going to be the KT LNG and the BLG T1 games because honestly, you think they could have gotten G2 Energy. They did not. Or C9 Fnatic. They did not because EU and A both, I think, lucked out with those matchups. KT, they've played BLG, Dplus, Weibo, and now LNG. I think cumulatively, that is the hardest draw of any team at Worlds. They truly do feel a little bit cursed. They were so good in the LCK regular season, and they are still so good now. I think about the game they had against Weibo, where they pulled to like a 7,000 gold lead at 20 minutes before soft throwing and making that game go about 38 minutes. But just their ability to actually run over a team of the quality of Weibo that much in the early game is something that very few teams in the world could do. So even though LNG has the LPL MVP and Scout, they are a bit of a slower team. And I personally will favor KT a bit in this game. I think we are still stuck a bit in an 80 carry meta. I think Aiming is having a career year. I think he might end up being the difference maker. But the biggest difference between these teams, I think, is the pace that KT is seemingly able to play with on this stage. I don't know how. The pressure should be so incredibly high with all the getting excited about KT curses, with the fact that they couldn't beat T1 despite picking them in playoffs, that they were 0-3 in series against T1 the entire year. But based on their quality of opponent and their ability to still be 2-1 at this stage, I think they're going to beat LNG, and I think they're going to advance into the bracket stage. Final matchup to cover is the BLG versus T1. I think it's a very unlucky draw for both of them. BLG so far has played KT. They lost to JDG. They beat Fnatic, now T1. T1 beat Team Liquid, lost to Gen.G, beat Cloud9, and now is facing BLG. A timeline, which I think is funny, but I don't necessarily want to happen, would be the timeline where T1 advances by only defeating North American teams, which is still a possibility because I think BLG will 2-0 this game. I said during the last podcast that I think if JDG didn't exist, BLG would be the best team in the world because JDG is pretty much the only ones who have been able to consistently beat them. 8 matches this year. BLG is 0-8. That is somewhat true for everyone. No one has beaten JDG this year. That's why they're on the Golden Road, and they're one of the teams that's already qualified for the bracket stage. But to elaborate a little bit on why I don't necessarily trust T1 at the moment, I would say the Faker factor is absolutely real. He does so much for this team in their ability to coordinate and taking advantage of Zeus's or Owner's ability or Gumayushi and Karia's ability to win lane and roam. But Faker himself didn't get an advantage on APA in lane whatsoever. I think even in the C9 game, M&S was considerably up in farm against Faker. Now, part of that was because M&S was over prioritizing his own gold and not covering for Blabber when he needed to. But Faker's the greatest of all time. I really do want to see T1 succeed. If you were to look at the totality of their accomplishments across the last 2 years, it is possibly the best in the world. They had a 5th game that could have won the world championship. They had a 5th game that could have won MSI, like literally last year. And then they made deep runs in the Worlds and MSI before that, and even made the World semifinal going all the way back to 2021 when the only difference in that team was no Zeus, but instead Kana. So like the continuity in that roster is high, the experience in that roster is high, but I think BLG is just a little bit on another level in terms of their team fighting. The Elk and his ability to not actually get a lead from laning phase, but then still outperform the other 80 carry in team fights. I can't say this because Ruler exists, but Ruler's also better in lane and gets more support in lane. But Elk is up there with the best team fighting 80 carries in the world. He might be the best. Can't make that comparison because Ruler exists, but as I said, slightly different. And then Bin and BLG's ability to play through topside with Yao roaming so much. It's just a really aggressive, hard team to deal with. And I don't know if T1's going to be able to keep up with that pace. So that's it for this section of JLXP. The first week of Swiss Stage was amazing. I hope the second week of Swiss Stage is amazing. There is an expiration date on this episode, though. If NA loses the Fnatic versus C9 series and also gets obliterated G2 versus Energy, I'm not going to feel great, honestly. But even if that happens, I'll be back next week for a podcast as well. So that'll do it for my portion of JLXP, and stay tuned because we're going to be chatting with Zven. All right, we're back with Zven. Zven, thank you for taking the time. You have 2 days in between the draw and your game against Fnatic.
Yep.
So yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah, always got time for a little chat podcast.
Yeah, 93rd episode. I was counting them up today. I wanted to ask you about how Swiss has gone for you so far.
It could be better. Could be worse.
Could be better. Could be worse. Okay, what could be worse? We'll start with that, and then we'll get positive.
I mean, we could have drawn not Mad Lions. That could have been worse.
Okay, yeah.
But besides that, I don't think it could get much worse.
Okay.
I think LNG second round and T1 third round is pretty unlucky compared to some other teams. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, Energy loses their first round to Weibo, which is the 4th seed.
Yeah. But then they get the dream draw afterwards.
Team Liquid.
Yeah.
I think they beat previously. And then they draw Mad now. No, wait. What was it? They drew
Mad, they drew G2.
They drew Mad and then G2.
Yeah.
So comparatively, could have been better. But at the same time, you got to beat those teams at some point anyways.
Yeah.
I always had the opinion that if you make it out of the group stage or the Swiss stage in this case, and you get 3-0 in quarters by the LPL's 3rd or 4th seed, then what does it really matter?
Yeah. I mean, so you've had a lot of experience at Worlds, right?
Mm-hmm.
2015, you were with Origin when you were Niels.
The good old times.
Yeah.
The glory days.
Yeah, semifinals, right?
Yeah.
But then 3-0. 2016 Worlds with G2.
That was the World Champs, though.
Okay, fair.
That's different. Yeah. If you lose to the World Champs, that's fine.
Oh, okay.
But if you lose to some, eventual 6th place or 3rd, 4th seed, it's
Yeah. What was I never asked you this. What do you feel like the difference was in 2015? Because that was a deep run.
I mean, for me personally, of the Western teams versus Eastern teams?
Sure, yeah. Why was Fnatic and Origin able to make it to semifinals in 2015?
I have no clue.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, don't know. I don't think it was luck, but for me personally, I was very different. The mindset I had, the way I was playing, and the way we were playing as a team. I definitely didn't care about who my opponents were.
Yeah.
I didn't even know who they were. I didn't know that LGD was supposed to be good and a world's contender, and that KT were LCK champs and stuff. I didn't even know who their players were.
I mean, that sounds like a difference to me. It's
I just turned up the stage and I was I'm just gonna hope for the best and play my best. I had this what was it that we said? We always said we expect nothing but hope for the best. That was our mindset in Origin. We didn't have these goals and expectations where if you didn't meet them, you would be really mad about it.
Mm-hmm.
But nowadays, there's a lot more pressure on you.
Yeah.
And social media has changed a lot. The tone of social media has changed a lot. And people read it more than they should.
Mm-hmm.
Me included. And it kind of affects you.
Yeah.
So I think that gets to a lot of people's heads.
Is there anyone that you know of on at this point Energy or C9 that is able to turn off from social media? Or has that kind of I don't even know who I'm playing against. I don't even know who's good. Or is everyone knows?
No, I don't think. I think everyone knows. There's too much, talk about who's the GOAT and who's the best teams and how bad is NA and EU and look at Mad, bro.
Yeah, actually.
They lose 1 or 2 games and their whole region is always turning on them.
Yeah.
I checked Niski's tweets. I don't read French, but you check some tweets and it's just everyone just hates Mad.
Yeah.
But they're winning your region, bro. They won was it second split they won?
So yeah,
Spring split, I guess it's called.
I feel if you look at the last 2 years in Europe, they're arguably the best. Yeah. Because they've won multiple splits. They advanced to MSI semifinals in 2021. They were the only European to make it out of Worlds groups in 2021.
Yeah.
They won the split to make it to MSI. And then sure, they lost to G2, but that happened.
They still made it there.
Yeah.
To this tournament. So you should not be blaming them for winning a region and then
I think it makes them
worse, maybe.
It makes them play worse, surely.
Yeah.
What
I don't
the
think it helped
doing.
them. Yeah. But I felt back in the day in Origin and stuff, the teams were behind the region.
Yeah.
or the
region was
fans
behind
were
the
behind
teams.
the regions,
Mhm.
and it felt like no matter what happened, they were cheering for you, win or lose. But nowadays, if you lose, there's just like, ha ha, you suck, you're so bad.
What
People praying
about
for your downfall.
what about? And I know this is going way back. 2016 when you were on G2
Yeah, that was a different vibe.
and CLG beat you twice.
yeah, that was not so good.
Yeah, and you went like 1-5 in that group. So that was, I think, Perks' like rookie year as well.
Yeah.
Did you feel like the region was behind you then, or is the region only
No.
behind you if you're winning?
No, that was different. But I think there was reason for it though, a little
Yeah.
bit, because we left Origin, which was a very liked team, to join the rival.
Yeah.
Also there was the
Oh,
whole.
I see. Yeah. There's the whole
there-
G2 villain arc, the G2 vacation
Yeah,
memes.
and then on top of that, G2 was talking shit about everyone.
Yeah.
I mean, we were like embracing the villain meme a little bit.
Yeah.
We did this like this content with like the guns and the money and shit.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. There's
Yeah,
a
actually-
few compounding factors.
Yeah, and then we obviously won again, which people didn't like because no one likes to see the bad guys win.
Yeah.
And then after we won, we wasted our first seed on losing to NA. After we said it was a free win,
Yeah.
so we were like, oh, we got a wild card and NA, it's free win.
Oh no.
And then
Yeah.
it was not free win.
Yeah. From
a lot
an
of
NA
good-
perspective, that was the saddest because G2 beat EU twice, but then lost to ANX twice and didn't make it out.
Yeah, I mean, CLG.
What the hell, man?
Yeah, that was a year. I always hate that. In 16, we weren't very good at Worlds,
Okay.
but then we had a really good draw. And in the
17, you were good.
the
but had a
next
bad
year,
draw.
we were actually really good. We
Yeah.
had a whole year together to improve in 17, and we had like so many tournaments like IEM, Rift
Mm-hmm.
Rivals, MSI, 17. And we actually improved so much. And then we got like the world champions, the eventual world champions, Samsung, and we got RNG.
Yeah.
RNG, who was the third, fourth place that year.
Yeah.
So you
But
couldn't
then
have
you did have 1907 Fenerbahce
yes.
Super Esports Club.
But in that old format, it's like
it didn't matter. You needed to beat the top
Ye-
two. It's like
exactly.
13
There was
games.
almost always one team in the group that was quote unquote free win.
Yeah.
Or an easy team, wild card or worse. So
Yeah.
I always think about like how annoying that was.
Yeah.
Because we were actually kind of bad in 16. We only had
Mm.
6 months, not
Mhm.
even like
Mhm.
3-4 months to
Yeah.
play as a team, and it was rough because of the situation.
Yeah.
But then the year after, we were actually really good, and then we just got that draw.
Yeah. And then you came to NA and became an NA GOAT.
Oh damn!
The
Rough 2 years after that.
So I mean, you've experienced it a lot of the different worlds formats. Then you experienced the groups when we didn't have 4 Korean and Chinese teams. You
Yeah,
could actually
yeah,
get like a good group rather than
Mhm.
just like a death group every time. But now you're experiencing Swiss. So
Mhm.
what do you think about Swiss so far?
Initially, I thought it was great. I still think it's better because everything is better than the old format.
Okay.
That's the first thing.
Yeah.
But
and every game next week will matter. Like
Yes.
you won't have those dead days where
it's
decided in
cool
2
that all
games.
games matter. That's
Yeah.
the best thing about it. And then best of threes is
Mhm.
included in the format, which is good. And then I really like that a lot more exciting games happen
Mhm.
because of the nature of the 1-0 teams playing each other and stuff. You'll
Mm,
see a lot more
mm.
different matchups from
Mhm,
everyone.
mhm.
As opposed to before you saw 3 unique games
Yeah.
per group.
Yeah.
Now you see a lot more unique games. That's cool. But there's still a lot of RNG involved.
Oh yeah. I mean, look who KT's had to play so far. It's
yeah, like looking at KT for example,
BOG, Dplus, and then Weibo. They're 2-1.
Bro,
but
that
and
one
now
is
they're
0-2.
playing LNG.
that one was 0-2. Now they're 1-2, right? They have a long like way to go. Whereas someone like Energy, for example,
Yeah.
they draw Weibo, get stomped in 5 minutes.
Yep.
Then after they lose, they draw Deal.
Yeah.
A team in their own region who's worse than them. Then after they beat Deal, they draw Mad Lions.
Yeah.
Mad Lions drew. Who did Mad Lions drew after they won? I think their own
Yeah.
region as
So
well.
Mad Lions had you, and
Yeah.
then they drew BDS.
Yeah, and
Which
then beat
knocked them up,
BDS,
and beat the
and
rest.
then Mad
Yeah.
Lions and Energy play, and Energy after beating Mad draws G2.
Yeah.
Now G2 is pretty good, but still, it's there's a lot of RNG involved, so you can get the quarters on that, but still, like I said earlier, like, if you make it to quarters and you lose 3-0 to anyone, then it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Okay.
But there is that, yeah.
G2 versus Energy. I want to get your opinion on this because you're on social media. Is
yeah.
it good for Energy to draw G2, or would it have been better for them to draw any other team?
I mean, who else could they have drawn, really? They could have drawn Genji, unwinnable.
No, Genji, JDG are through.
Oh, yeah, they're
So,
2-0.
yeah, yeah,
I mean,
so
2-0, right?
it's,
They made it already, yeah. You're right.
Yeah, there's
Who's 2-1?
there's T1,
T1,
BLG,
unwinnable.
KT,
Unwinnable.
and LNG.
Unwinnable.
But G2,
Less unwinnable.
less unwinnable, right? See, that's my opinion too.
We'll take those.
Yeah. Well, here's the question, because a lot of people think that if G2 doesn't get energy, well, not a lot of people. Some people that I've talked to, I'm not going to name names, think that if G2 didn't get energy, they wouldn't. There's a chance they don't even make it to quarters.
G2 or
Yeah.
I
So
agree.
like G2 is the only way they can make it through, or that's what they'd hope for.
Yeah, I
Or
agree.
is the humiliation of losing to G2 worse than the potential upside of beating them?
That depends if you're on Team West or Team NA/EU.
Oh,
For the West, this
okay.
is
No
good.
one's on Team West at this point.
Yeah, that's true. No
Right?
one's on Team West. Fuck the West.
Yeah, like I think that for the West was like a 2013 thing.
The West is like once your whole region is out, you cheer for the other one.
Yeah, but
But
then,
not really,
then that
actually.
team
You
like doesn't let
just
you
hope
on
they
the
lose.
bus. They just like you're like, okay, you can have like a different car and follow the bus.
So once all the NA teams are out, you cheer for EU to lose. You're like hating on the praying
I
on the
actually
downfall.
feel like at this point, like since G2 did that thing to TL in 2019, the fastest 3-0 in international history. I think since that point,
You were
not
off Team
only
West.
I think the NA fans want to see EU fail.
I mean,
Do you think?
yeah.
I mean,
of
you're
course.
originally from Europe. Do you want to see Europe fail?
No, not really. But I have like friends in most teams.
Yeah.
I talk to.
Yeah.
You know, like I'm friends with Broken Blade or Mickey X, even
Mhm.
Caps from
Yeah.
G2. So I don't want to see them fail.
Yeah.
But I also like, I kind of admit I don't want to see them win either. Like I don't mind if they make quarters or something, but if they make Worlds Finals while I'm like stuck in
Well, that
in
could
Swiss,
be like a competitor thing too. Like you probably
Yeah.
don't even want to see Energy do well.
it's kind of like when you switch teams.
Yeah.
You know, let's say like, I'm sure Vulcan, for example, when he left C9, wasn't hoping we would lose, but he wasn't hoping we would win either. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because you don't want to be the reason your team wasn't making it further.
Yeah.
Or like when I left TSM, I was salty as hell, bro.
Yeah.
I was hoping like I hope they burnt the ground. Now they have, which is
Well,
seven
now
topic.
they're not in the league anymore. So,
But like I was hoping they'd lose. But I was fine with them being second or third, as long as I was first.
as long as you're ahead, yeah.
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 Because I still had friends in that team that I liked.
Yeah.
So it's like it goes both ways. But we're talking about something else. Probably got off topic.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
The West thing, yeah. I think it's a good draw for both NRG and G2. It's like you
I
can
agree.
both be happy.
I agree.
And when we drew,
I think there's a lot of NA fans that aren't happy because they have too much PTSD from losing and they just don't want it to happen again.
But I think-
I'm on the side that there's nothing to lose because the only even if NRG drew one of the Eastern teams and lost, people would still like they're always just going to think G2 is better than like even if G2 loses,
Yes.
they're still going to say that EU is better than NA. So
Yeah.
the only way you can flip the narrative is to directly take on G2.
Yeah, I think it's fair to assume that G2 is currently the top dog in the Western.
Absolutely, and I think they
And-
are.
Yeah, I don't think there's much to say about that. So until they play someone and then they lose, that won't be taken away from them.
There is definitely upside for NA, but just
Yeah.
you've played in EU, you've played in NA, you have pro player friends on both sides. I think you can actually be pretty unbiased. Give me a 70-30, 60-40. How much is G2 favored against Energy in your opinion?
I'd say like 65-35.
I'll
But
take that.
I think that G2, while they won against Damwon and they won against Weibo,
Mhm.
the Weibo game was a steal.
Yep.
The game against Damwon wasn't a steal until they threw a Baron.
Yep.
It was a free win
But
until
then
that point.
also it was they were winning pretty substantially. But then
Yeah.
the extra unlucky thing for Dplus would be they had the Varus poke comp and then G2 got Ocean Soul.
Yeah. But if your opponent gets Soul, it's your fault no matter which Soul they get.
True.
So you can't blame it on that. So
Hey,
I think
like that.
they
I like
deserve that. But with that said, Damwon also ran into G2's comp really hard.
Mm.
I think, not going to leak anything here, but G2 did show against Genji that they are a different team when they have bot prio.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
hard prio.
Yeah, you're not
Champs-
leaking anything. Everyone
Yeah.
saw that.
Champs like Draven, champs like Kalista,
Yeah.
are G2's signature picks for a long time.
Yeah.
And if you're going on stage and you're picking Lucian Nautilus, Maokai Talia,
Yeah.
because someone banned your champs, that's a good sign that this team has weakness, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So hopefully Energy has watched games.
I think they have. I think Energy's drafts were generally pretty good in NA.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think that after they lost to us in the first round,
Mm-hmm.
they changed their draft a lot. Top lane
Yeah.
picked up champs like Rumble and stuff,
Yeah,
which
Rumble
helped them.
Jacks.
Yeah, helped them clean up their drafts. So since then, I think they've been okay. Yeah, I agree. But I think that G2 is really good when they're on their game, but when they're off their best champs, they look
Yeah.
a lot worse, and they kind of rely on that. So I think Energy has hope.
Okay. First time I met you was like way back in, I think it was like 2016 MSI or something.
I didn't go there, so that can't be.
No, 2017 MSI.
Really?
Was it?
You were not on 15 Worlds?
No, it was
16
15 Worlds. I talked to you when you were OG Niels.
The good old
Yeah.
days.
But basically, you played a game, and I asked you, like, how'd that game go? And you literally recited like the whole game for me. You're just like, yeah, first wave, this didn't go well, and then I got to this item power, and you talked for like 10 minutes. So I always felt like your recall has been really impressive, and I wanted to ask you about the T1 game.
I think it's a pro player thing. You remember every game you ever played in detail.
But do you remember the T1 game?
The one that I got stomped in 2 days ago?
Now.
Yeah, I remember that one.
What happened? What or even like what were the takeaways?
The takeaways from our review was short. First, talk draft.
Yep.
We asked about like who was supposed to have prio because you need to have some lanes with prio or you can't
especially
play
when you have
game.
Belveth. Yep.
Yeah, and then you last pick a jungler like Belveth, the plan to invade, but we don't really have the information early game.
Yeah.
To invade. We talked about jungle pathing a little bit, how we shouldn't have used time in the early game to gank because there was a ward and we knew there was a ward.
Sure.
That was one thing. And then we talked about how we went for a chicken invade once, but it was under ball space timer, which we knew about. And we went there, couldn't get the chickens, had to go back, so we wasted more time. T1's biggest thing is that when they see your jungler somewhere doing something like ganking or looking for plays, they will use that time that their jungler now has to do something.
Yeah.
And they did in this game. We had a presentation about it from Duffman, our analyst.
Yeah.
And he said that if they see you ganking somewhere, he will do his full clear and then he'll go to your next camps, which he did. Went to our chickens, went to our Krugs, and their top laner came to the Krugs, and it was a disaster, right?
Yeah.
We ended up getting pushed out, losing our camp, and then top got dove. This is already like a massive disaster in the game, right? So I decided that I'm going to just, at the Herald timing, I'm going to run top. And I was at the Herald for like almost a minute.
Yeah.
From like 7:45-ish to 8 something until the top tier 3. And I thought, if I don't do something here, we will lose.
Right.
Because the way I was hearing it in game and comms was, we're giving Herald. So I was saying I'm moving first. And Bar was still bottom when I was actually at the Herald.
Yeah, exactly.
But we couldn't do it. We felt like we were afraid of getting 3v4'd. And I was thinking, already lost his flash on the Rumble move. So at this point, it's like we're looking at giving Dragon, giving Herald. We're already down, at least in the game, I thought like 1,000 something gold.
Yep.
And now we're looking at a 3,000 gold lead in the next couple of minutes. And it won't get better because once Bar gets 6, he's going to run mid, press ult. If it hits, you're dead.
Yep.
And you're playing Orianna without boots at this point, probably. So like, I'm looking at a game where they control everywhere.
Yeah.
They will probably get at least 2 dragons for free because of the gold lead. And we will have to choose, is the last stand 3rd dragon or 4th? And if it's a bad soul, do we automatically lose?
Yeah.
Do we outscale? Yes, we do outscale. But they still have like Silas.
It's close.
Silas, Saya, it's not exactly bad late game either, right? So yes, we do outscale if you get 6 items magically. But can we get there? It's like this, you have this like thing in your head where you're like combining all the games you played in your whole life. And you're like, can we make it to this point where we have the items we need to win reliably against this team, given our team, blah, blah, blah.
And you're basically thinking no, so it's 8 minutes.
It's like a math calculation. And I'm like, I'm going here.
Yeah.
And if we can't win 3-2 top side with me being there first and Bard coming from base, I knew he was coming, but I didn't know where he was.
Yeah.
It's just like, you have to choose when do you lose.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, obviously, I think in hindsight, we shouldn't have fought top.
Sure.
Obviously, we got triple killed, so it was bad. But even if we did nothing there and we just, we do for a play later, we don't have many guaranteed plays in our game.
Yeah, I agree.
Our whole comp relies on Belveth invading Jarvan early game. That was the point of our comp. And then, if we get the top matchup ahead, just one good play on Rumble, Jax wins forever. And then we can dive Rumble on side lane. Jax will beat both Rumble and Silas because they're single type of damage, right?
Yeah.
He can buy like Mercs and like Maul or something like that. I don't know.
Just sit on an extra null magic or something.
Yeah, literally. Yeah. And then our combo outscales. But instead, we are losing our camps early game. When we had last pick jungle, we're getting pushed in lanes. We shouldn't be like bot, for example. We got 2 support bands, 4-5. And then think about the bot pick. It was actually a good pick, I think.
Yeah.
Pretty smart. We pushed early. And, we're looking at this kind of game where it's hard to play because when Bard's team is winning, Bard's everywhere. He has Moby Boots in his passive. Ult on Orianna, dead. Tower dives, silent, dead.
Jarvan and Bard both just Orianna has no.
They will be everywhere.
Dead every time.
They'll be everywhere. Yeah. Our comp relies on us finding their jungler and us invading their jungler, and then me and Velvet being strong in 2v2s than Bar and Jarvan.
Yeah.
So we just made a decision to just fight there and lose in peace, I guess.
See what I mean? You remember the whole game.
Yeah.
I remember like bits and pieces when you.
It was 2 days ago, so
yeah, I know, but it's.
But yeah, I still remember like the old lane swaps. Like, oh, in this one game we didn't freeze the wave once, so we lost the whole game of it.
Yeah,
exactly. Like the good old lane swaps.
Yeah, and with no, this is one of the weird things about League of Legends. I feel like with no practice tool to like set up Baron situations or something.
Yeah,
it's like that 7 years of experience or 8 years of experience actually ends up being really valuable because that's one of the only like you need thousands and thousands of games to get. Yeah. Almost the correct number of reps in to get the right equation in your head for when you need to make.
I don't even know how many games I have in my career.
Well, on stage you're probably around like 700 or 800.
Yeah,
but then like if you did total games, you're probably at like 20 or 30K.
Oh yeah, I mean,
yeah,
I have no idea
because you probably play like 2,000 games a year
at least. Yeah,
yeah. You mentioned that the Bard was a little bit unexpected. Do you feel like it was that big of an impact in the game? Like from a fan perspective, the big play was Bard alting the bot tier to it as T1 like cleaned up C9. But
yeah,
how did you feel like the Bard played out in that game?
I actually didn't see the bot play until after. I didn't notice in the game what he did. It was pretty sick, not gonna lie. But as for the Bard impact on the game, I think it didn't matter because we lost the game before Bard even played the game.
Yeah,
like we lost the game on the top fight.
Top side.
Sure, Bard was there. He made it there in the end. But that play was bad no matter which character he was playing. I remember in draft, once they didn't pick support, so we banned 2 supports in 4-5, and they banned Rel.
Yeah.
We thought they would pick Rel. And then they didn't. And we're like, oh, so he's probably playing either Leona or like Bard. I guess at this point. Because Bard is not a bad pick in this patch. It's just a very niche pick.
Yep.
But then this game we already lost before we got to the point where Bard can do Bard things.
Yeah.
Bard's like either you run around the whole early game trying to be funny, or you wait until 6 and you just ult on either, Oriana, Victor's, whatever.
You chain out the guy without flash.
Yeah. Or you try to dive silence. And we didn't even get to that point yet because the bot dive happened when we were already down like, I don't know, 3,000-4,000 gold. And the game was already mega over, right? So we didn't think much about it. But I watched the Bard play later when we were watching we were doing our review of the game.
Yeah.
I was like, whoa, this guy is good.
Is there any additional feeling playing against like T1 or specifically like T1 in Korea before the game?
T1 in Korea, yeah. They're by far the biggest fan base. Like you can feel it in the stadium when you're playing T1. Like the vibe is different. It's like the world is against you.
The support.
Yeah. But against Faker specifically, no, not anymore. But they used to be. He used to have this like presence in the game. Like, oh, that's Faker.
Right.
He doesn't have that anymore.
Who has the most presence on T1?
I guess Kyria or Faker because of status. But like these days, I don't think anyone has that feeling.
Yeah,
anymore.
No one has that.
Yeah, no one is like that much better than their opponents anymore. Faker is just a thing we tell ourselves, right? Like he's the GOAT, which he is, right?
Yeah,
and he's a big deal. My record against Faker is like 1-13 or something.
Sure,
but that doesn't matter to me in the game.
Yeah.
But yeah, the T1 thing is real, and in Korea it's even worse because they are the biggest team, and you can tell when anything happens, go for them. Whoa!
Right.
You get a kill.
Just total crickets.
Exactly.
Like, are we even doing good?
That's just how it is, right?
Yeah.
It was the same in NA when NA was getting clapped by Korea. No one cared. Actually, that's not true because everyone came from Korea to cheer for T1, so it wasn't actually not the same. But
yeah, that's awesome. I mean, not awesome, but it's good context, and just the difference of every time you play an LCS game, you make a good play, you hear noise.
Yeah,
but it's probably a little bit strange. Like you make a good play, and there's nothing.
Yeah, at the national events, there's less cheering for the game and more cheering for the teams. While in LCS, no matter who you are, who you're playing against, there's fans on both sides.
Yeah.
Sure, the same in LSC or LCK, but like when it's Worlds or MSI, it's not about the game anymore. Unless it's like, Mad versus Energy was a complete fist fight.
Yeah.
And I think the crowd was loving it, both sides, because they didn't care about the outcome. But when it's like Korea versus NA or Korea versus EU or China versus Korea, then it's like it's all about the teams, not about the game.
Yeah. One small thing, and I know it's hard because the game happened. Because Team Liquid played T1 close, did that give you guys any extra confidence that maybe could have had an impact on the game in some way?
Maybe a little, because T1 showed weakness. But at the same time, I also know after scrimming thousands of games that some games you lose in 5 minutes. It
Mhm.
happens. And some
yeah.
games you don't.
Exactly.
Now, I think TL played better, obviously, than we did. But it's
Mhm.
like, how do I explain that? Like, you scrim a lot of games. We scrimmed BLG yesterday.
Yeah, losing in 5 minutes is not necessarily worse than losing in 25 minutes.
It's not, yeah.
Yeah, because it
It's-
depends on the comps and the situation and what happened.
Like, a lot of teams would have won the same way T1 did.
Mhm.
TL might have won that game in 5 minutes as well.
Yeah.
It happens.
Yeah.
Yesterday we scrimmed BLG. We won 2 games out of like the 6 we scrimmed
Yeah, nice.
in like
2 out of 6. That's pretty good.
in like 6 minutes. They
Yeah.
said GG.
Oh, sure.
One
And
time-
just go next scrim.
First time they say AG, which means again, like remake.
Yeah.
And we're like, okay, sure. We go again. Same exact draft, win again in 6 minutes. We're like, okay, fuck this. We're out. New draft, right? That it happens.
Yeah.
And it's like we just got stumped. It
Mhm.
just happens. It's unfortunate it had to happen on stage in front of everyone in Korea, right? But it doesn't. You can't let that get to you.
Yeah.
Uh,
Do you
Yeah.
have any, now that they're eliminated, any thoughts on TL's year?
disaster.
Yeah.
Just disaster. I don't know what to say.
They did go from 8th. They were 8th in spring.
Yes, that's good.
Then they made it to World. So the improvement was good.
Yes, I will say it just felt like they band-aided a lot.
Yeah.
They're like, all right, slap APA in there.
Sure. Now he can.
American
team
guy
fight.
who
Yeah.
can't speak Korean in a team that speaks Korean, but a coach who speaks Korean. Yeah, that's gonna work.
Yeah.
Like,
They did kind of abandon their whole. We're going to speak Korean.
and then it felt like they never fixed their identity problem.
Mhm.
Like Summit playing tanks at Worlds, for example,
Sure. Cassante.
looking terrible on it.
Yeah.
Every single game. Seems like he was unhappy with it.
Mm.
And then like there had this like distinct draft problems. For example, against Energy, they picked Kalista 1-2, which is a high priority pick in this tournament.
Yeah.
It's banned a lot on blue side because it's good on red side, 1-2. But then they don't pick Renata. The entire reason the champion is good on 1-2.
Mhm.
So I'm like, is this a core GJ problem? Or is it a mid jungle problem that they can't play champions if they go 4-5 with the jungler or the mid laner?
I think they thought they couldn't go 4-5.
Because Energy picked Sedona and Jax.
Yeah. Piosik actually said, and I saw some like text post
It
that
was,
like, oh yeah, we couldn't let mid go 4-5, which is
yeah.
like
a vent interview, it looked like.
Yeah.
I saw Blabber was watching
They
it last
definitely
night.
thought that, whether or not it's going to.
Yeah, Blabber was
be
watching the
true or
interview
not.
last night and it seemed like a bit of a cope position.
Yeah.
I don't blame him, but it's like you pick this champ because it's really good with Renata.
Mhm.
Your opponents pick 2 champions, Sedona and Jax, that are really bad with Renata, but you don't pick Renata.
Yeah.
Then your opponents ban it, and you're like, whoa, no way. And it's like these things happen to TL all the
Mhm.
time. I remember in 2021, TL was the team that wanted to play Rel against Yumi, against someone, I don't remember. And then they were like, yeah, we messed up one wave at level 1, so we couldn't do the thing we practiced.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I asked Tactical about it. So your whole strategy relies on not making a single mistake level 1, level 2. Yeah. And if you do, you lose the game automatically.
Yeah.
So you wonder if that's like a TL thing or a Code J thing, that you just don't want to play Yumi, you don't want to play against it. You want to play against it, but anyone else wants to ban it, and now you don't play Renata. Is this a mid jungle problem or is this a ball line problem?
Yeah.
I also think Jan had a rough tournament.
Yeah.
I think he played a lot worse than he is,
Mhm.
even given the whole like you're a rookie at Worlds, blah 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 thing.
Mhm.
It's not enough excuse, I think. APA, I think he played okay. I don't know. I can't even imagine the situation he's in where his whole team speaks a different language than he does.
Yeah.
Both in the game,
And
but
even
also
out of the game.
probably too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I've seen Piosik around. He was in our facility as well, sandbox facility, when we were
Yeah.
boot camping. He doesn't speak a word of English, from what I can gather. So you have like 2 people that speak your language in your team, not counting like management.
Yeah.
I don't think it's easy to be in that kind of environment all day long. So I think TL was always like an inevitable, like
It was always going to be
yeah,
a
it
really
was never
hard
gonna
journey
work
for
like,
them.
It was like a band-aid,
yeah,
get the Worlds and then hope for the best.
Yeah, the
kind of
hope
thing.
the hope for the best was like maybe they find some like really I thought maybe they'd find some like off meta answers from APA because
Yeah.
weirdly enough, like his trusted champion pool I think was too small based on the way they were drafting.
Yes.
But he plays a lot of different like weird stuff. He
Mhm.
was drawing multiple bans each game, but then ultimately like the Syndra into Orianna never looked good. His Orianna itself never looked good. So
when it comes to drawing bans, there's always been the 2 opinions.
drawing bans.
Is this guy too good on too many champions? We
Mhm.
call this a peanut effect.
Mm.
Like Peanut's getting target banned every game.
Right.
If you're watching Ninja games. Or is he too bad on all champs?
I think people are doing it because they think he's bad on the other champs.
Yeah, a lot of people think APA, if he isn't playing 6, is a worse player. So they think, okay, we're just going to ban 6. We're going to ban what's second most played? Nico. And then we just see what happens. We take the skill matchup. I think he did fine in Syndra vs. Oriana against T1.
Yeah.
But he did poorly against, Palafox. So maybe it's the one-off. Either way. But yeah, I think APA went to Korea really early after the LCS finals. He got here before we did, and we got here really early.
Yeah, he played.
And he was playing a lot of games with Jan as well.
600 games.
But when I checked his profile, I was disappointed because, well, I respect someone that grinds and goes early to practice, something that I think rookies should do. He was not playing the champs I think he should have been. I didn't see him playing 50 games of Jace.
Right.
I didn't see...
He was spamming Oriana and Syndra.
Yeah. Oriana and Syndra turned out to be fine because that's the meta in this tournament. But I don't see him having 100 games of Asir and Jace in solo queue, which is what I would have wanted to see if I was him or in his team, because it was notorious that TL couldn't play LeBlanc or Jace, and they were banning them whole playoffs because Marco Jace was really OP.
Yep.
And LeBlanc was really OP with Stack Shave, especially, right, which wasn't getting nerfed. Freak ruined the game.
Yeah.
So I wanted to see that, for example, from him, right? I remember checking his profile. I'm like, why are you playing 6 in solo queue, bro?
Right. Yeah.
I actually saw a 6 game. When I checked OBGG, and I was like, bro, you're not going to play 1 game of 6 at Worlds. Not a single game. Your team is not good enough to draw bans elsewhere. So that's something. But I do think that his champ pool wasn't the problem in this team, because every team at Worlds has problems.
Yeah.
Some teams, for example, JG or Genji don't play Asir.
Sure, Knight doesn't play it.
Yeah, they just don't play it. And Asir is a really highly contested pick for a lot of teams like LNG or who else plays?
Yeah, Scout's an amazing Asir.
Yeah, for example. But that doesn't matter because they draft around it. They find a way around this kind of problem. Some teams don't play Vi. Some teams don't play carry stop.
You can actually win Worlds with a couple Band-Aids.
Exactly.
Right? Like FPX won Worlds. Doingby wasn't playing Akali. He was the most OP champion the whole Worlds. Yeah. But he had answers.
Every year there's some teams that don't play some champs, and you have to figure out how you can work around it. Who can sacrifice for you to avoid this problem? Because you only have so many bans, right? And that's the more important thing. How you work around it.
Even though TL was band-aiding the whole year, did you see PO6 on stage reaction right after the game?
He was crying, I think, right?
He was just crushed. You've been in that situation before. Yeah, even though you kind of knew it was going to end at some point, it's like when it hit him that it was actually over, it was just kind of overwhelming.
Yeah, I mean, I had a similar feeling in 2017 when I saw Perks crying after we lost in groups. I also started crying a little bit because it's hard to see people you care about that.
Yeah.
But for him, not sure what he's going through. You can never know. But I'm guessing that almost a year ago, he won Worlds. Yeah. He literally won Worlds.
Yeah.
In the craziest Worlds ever.
Yeah.
And it was
it's kind of hard to believe that the run's ever going to end almost.
Yeah. It's hard to think that a year ago you were at the literal highest point you can get in a league career. You can't get any better than this in the best way possible as well. And then a year later, he's in NA losing to a wildcard.
Yeah.
The only wildcard left in the tournament in that stage of the bracket, right? 0-2 bracket. I can't imagine what he's going through.
It's tough.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know if it's that, or if he hates his teammates, or if he hates the region he's playing in, or if he's just embarrassed losing to Vietnam, or what it is, right? It could be a lot of different things. Maybe he thinks his career is over now because he lost. I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of career implications at Worlds.
Yeah, I did see, for what it's worth, I did see a lot of support for him online, which is different. We talked about the difference currently this year about the way teams are treating, say, Mad Lions versus TL. Even though TL, as you mentioned, a disaster. The good thing is I actually didn't see that many people rubbing it in online, which I think that's good. If you're an NA fan and you want NA to do well, don't rub it in.
I haven't been reading, but I can imagine. Yeah. I mean, POC played an overall good game. I think for the most part.
Yeah, he had a good Kindred game.
He had a good game against T1. He was making these plays that I wouldn't say they're necessarily good, but they had to be done. It's hard to play jungle, especially when you're in a team where you think if you don't do something funny, you will lose.
Yeah.
It's the hardest mindset to be in.
Really hard.
You have this idea that if I don't carry, no one will.
But sometimes that idea itself is what makes it so that's true.
Yes. Exactly. Because you make mistakes. I've been there myself as an AD carry where you're if I don't carry this game, no one will.
Yeah.
And then you put yourself in danger and then you are the reason you're losing suddenly.
Yep.
It's a hard mindset to be in, and it's a lot of stress for him, I can imagine. So it's just like this circle of suck.
Yeah. Anyway, I want to ask you about Fnatic, and this will come out before your game.
Okay.
Your
So
comments may
can't leak
age
anything.
poorly.
Can't
I
leak.
don't want you to leak anything, but I want you to ask, like, kind of, how do you feel about the draw from the C9 perspective, and what's the confidence level?
Happy.
Yeah.
Very happy.
Because I think the only team you may have rather had would have been GAM, or I mean, the Mad rematch might have been nice.
For me personally, I don't care about like whether it's Mad or GAM or Fnatic. If you can't beat those teams, you can't beat anyone.
Right.
You know, you're not gonna make it anyways.
Mhm.
So for me, it's like I'm happy we drew those teams.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm hoping we draw them as well in the second round if we make it there.
Mhm.
But like I said, beating some lows
Yeah.
to make quarterfinals, like which is what maybe G2 will do.
Sure.
It's
still going to matter what happens in quarters.
They
for
beat
you.
down one and Weibo to get there, right?
Yeah.
But like, it does matter to make it there. But if you lose 3-0 anyways, because you only beat like NA or something, like we could beat only Mad Lions all the quarterfinals.
It would be pretty funny.
Yeah, like Mad could lose their game and meet us.
Yeah.
And we could beat them again and again.
It could have actually happened. Yeah, there's a situation.
We could beat only LAC's not first seed team all the way to quarters.
Yeah.
And then lose to, you know, whoever we draw there.
Yeah.
That wouldn't mean anything to me. Yeah, it wouldn't matter to me at all. So I'm happy with the draw, but you know, still gotta beat someone. So
yeah. My
it's not a big deal.
I don't know if I've told you about this. My thoughts for Swiss is I like the format because it's unfair, but doesn't necessarily feel that unfair.
Yeah.
Like it would have felt, I think the thing that I'd like protections against would be like the triple rematch. Like that should just be impossible.
Yeah.
If that, it didn't happen, but if it could have happened. But like if you lose to 3 unique opponents, even if those opponents are super tough, it'll still feel fair of, okay, you're not going to win Worlds. You lost to 3 different teams.
Yes. I agree.
But then it gives the possibility of a team sneaking through, and it just creates kind of more exciting matchups.
Yeah. There's definitely going to be a little bit of a sneak on both sides. At least one.
Mm-hmm.
For example,
the winner of G2 would be less of a sneak, but I would say like their game against Weibo was a sneak.
Yes, it was an absolute steal.
It was an absolute steal. Like, yes, they technically beat them, but that was a sneak.
Yeah, I'm still baffled on how like MikiXW as Rakan on Asir. He didn't actually have ult on the Rakan, and Asir had flash, stopwatch, ult, and E.
Yeah,
and nothing was pressed. Boop, and he hit him, ulted, and killed him. And I was like, wow. 10k gold down. The enemy just sold.
Especially
like, no way.
Especially because it was Scout. Yeah. And he just been
Xiao.
Oh shoot, you're right. I got them mixed up. Got the video. No, but just because Xiao has actually been playing really well as well.
Yeah, he has
got in my head
for a long time now.
Yeah.
That guy's I think very underrated as a pro. But yeah, I was like, wow, they actually did that and they won. Yes, that was a steal. Yeah. But like, I think if you're looking at, imagine you're like 0-2 and you're like, oh, I'm playing against that one.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, they are legitimately still the only team from the West that's beaten the East. And they did it twice. So like, it's not a sneak even if they beat
I don't think G2 is undeserved at all.
Yeah. I'm going to give you some world stats and you can react to them however you want.
All right.
So the NA team that has the most games against EU is Cloud9.
Of all time?
They're 10-12 all time against EU at Worlds.
Not bad.
The EU team with the most games against NA is Fnatic. 33 games. They're 25-8.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
What's my record against Fnatic? I wonder. Well, last year I was 1-1 against them. That's the only time I played Fnatic, I think.
Yeah.
While I've been in NA.
They've done it somehow. That's Worlds and MSI.
Hate those guys.
And then G2 all time at the World Championship is
could be a bit worse.
4-4 at Worlds, 11-4 at MSI. So a lot of their wins are from MSI. And then the NA team with the best record all time against EU, COG, 7-2.
Hate those guys.
Yeah, I mean they don't exist anymore.
Yeah, they beat me.
Yeah, Energy. Yeah, 2 of those wins were against G2.
I'm part of 2 of those wins.
Yeah.
On the other side.
All right, Zven, thank you so much for taking the time. 2 calendar days from recording this. I think you brought a little over 48 hours until the Fnatic game. So
thank you for having me.
Yeah, fingers crossed that happens. I'm personally pulling for a double NA win, but I can't get too greedy because literally 0-2 is, I'm prepared for it mentally. Yeah. Anyway, thank you for joining JLXP. Just an update on what we're doing here. JLXP will be releasing weekly throughout the World Championship. Let's Go will also be releasing on the LCS YouTube channel. We'll have bits from this podcast. I'm also going to be having dinner with Wild Turtle, who's here for a Korean boot camp, talk about Worlds with him as well. And yeah, even if NA does get eliminated, which is unthinkable, really, that's not going to happen. We're going to be here every week for Let's Go.
So much confidence in us.
You need to project.
You're like ready for us to lose.
Yeah. Listen, I'm the most positive. Of the broadcast team, I am the most positive. So, okay, thanks for joining us.
Good luck, but if you lose, it's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll see you next time.